Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 18680 in the name of Richard Leonard on behalf of the Public Audit Committee on the 2022-23 and 2023-24 excuse me, gentlemen, thank you, audits of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate, please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Richard Leonard on behalf of the Public Audit Committee to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 9 minutes, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy Presiding Officer. Being the convener of the Public Audit Committee is a privilege, and it is one which I will never take for granted. So I am grateful to be opening this afternoon's debate on the committee's findings, on our conclusions from our extensive scrutiny of the Auditor General's two Section 22 reports following his annual audits of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland between 2022 and 2024. At the very start, let me put on record the thanks of the committee, past and present, to the clerks, past and present, and to the entire support team for the hard work that has gone into the production of this report. What we have exposed is an extreme example, in the words of the Auditor General, of governance and financial issues falling far short of what is expected by a public body. And as we gathered evidence over the course of a year, we uncovered a catalogue of failures by Wix, by its former Chief Executive, by its board and by the Scottish Government. All of them failed to meet the core minimum standards that are required of them. And by their action and by their inaction, conscious choices both, they all contributed to an extraordinary, flagrant misuse of public funds. Significant sums of public money, our money, the people's money, splashed out on expensive training courses for senior staff, on unauthorised Amazon gift vouchers to all staff, and on excessive and unreceipted hospitality claims, business entertaining costs, unquote, racked up by the most powerful staff in the organisation. Time after time, the audits uncovered fundamental weaknesses in financial controls, where expenses claims were paid out with missing or non-itemised receipts. At one point, at the start of 2023, unbelievably, the limit per head for spend on these business entertaining costs, including meals and alcohol, was done away with completely. I will take an intervention.
Graeme Simpson.
The convener of the committee for taking the intervention. And just on that last point, would he agree that the committee never had an adequate explanation as to why that limit was removed?
Richard Leonard.
Yeah, I thank Graeme Simpson, who's been a very active member of this inquiry by the committee, and I agree with him that there are still many unanswered questions. We revealed over the course of the inquiry both a careless neglect, but as well a willful indifference towards policies and procedures for things like the procurement of services, like legal advice, recruitment searches, and the booking of business class air travel. And of course, this all from the body which was created in statute by this Parliament to promote the interests of Scottish Water customers, to ensure long-term value and to ensure excellent levels of service. You couldn't make it up. So this is rightly a matter of serious concern for this Parliament, but the fundamental question which has to be addressed today, which must also be a matter of serious concern to this Parliament and to this Government, is not just that these things happened, it is that these things were allowed to happen. Where was the challenge to these behaviours by the board of the Water Industry Commission Scotland? Where was Where was the challenge from the Scottish Government's sponsorship team? And how on earth was it that Wix drifted into a culture of spending public money in ways which were directly and blatantly in breach of the rules of the Scottish Public Finance Manual? And I know that the Cabinet Secretary for Climate Action and Energy accepts this, and the new leadership team at Wix accepts it too. But let me turn to some of the most egregious examples identified by these audits. It has been widely reported that a senior member of staff attended a training course at the Harvard Business School in Boston at a total cost of over £77,000. What has been less widely reported is that there was no competitive tendering exercise, that there was no business case made, no value for money case made, that there was no lock-in period for that member of staff involved, so that they could just have left their job the day after the course was finished. And that even though it breached the spending threshold of £20,000, there was no Scottish Government approval sought either. In fact, when it was applied for retrospectively, we were told by a senior civil servant that, I quote, "there was no material benefit in challenging the expenditure as the money had already been spent." The Government has since backtracked on this, but this was not an isolated incident. Freedom of Information requests later revealed that it was common practice for senior staff at Wix to attend expensive management training courses in locations as far-flung as not only North America, but South America too, where once again the total cost exceeded £70,000. Now, don't get me wrong, in our report we recognise the importance of staff training and development to any public sector organisation. Of course we do. But this excessive expenditure was clearly unwarranted, unauthorised and unpardonable. Let me turn to another wider lesson from what happened at Wix. The Commission is a small public body. At the time of these audits, it employed just 25 members of staff. We heard that the Scottish Government sponsorship team did not view Wix as a high-risk body. In fact, the Government's Director General for Net Zero himself even told us that he thought that out of all the public sector bodies he is responsible for, Wix would have been, I quote, "the one to operate in a highly efficient way." This proved to be nothing less than a monumental error of judgment. The work undertaken by Audit Scotland prompted Wix to carry out its own reviews into its financial transactions and its governance. It forced the Scottish Government to commission further independent reviews into these areas and into its own sponsorship oversight. But let me make the point again. The members of the Wix board who presided over this need to take a long, hard look at themselves and ask if they performed the job, if they set the standards of corporate governance we expect and demand in the public sector. In the report, we also make other recommendations which I'm sure other members of the committee will refer to. But let me be absolutely clear. Wix may be a small body, but the lessons to learn here are big ones. They are about governance, accountability and the proper use of public money. These lessons must be applied across all of Scotland's public bodies and not just at Wix. At the heart of a properly functioning democracy must be accountability. And accountability demands transparency. Where that is in short supply, it is the job of this Parliament to force it out of the shadows into the light. That is what the Public Audit Committee has done with this investigation and with this report. These are matters not only of public interest, these are matters of public trust. On behalf of the Public Audit Committee, I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Mr Leonard. I now call on Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin to open on behalf of the Scottish Government. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to speak about the matters raised in the Public Audit Committee's report into the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, or WICS, as I will refer to it from now on. Let me start by commending the committee for the scrutiny given to these issues and for the report, which I found to be very balanced and constructive. Before getting into the substantive content of the committee's report, I want to be absolutely clear that nobody was more disappointed by the issues at WICS than Scottish ministers. It bears restating that the cases of inappropriate expenditure were completely and utterly unacceptable, and we rightly expect far higher standards from our public bodies. To help address these issues, we commissioned and published reviews into WICS's financial governance and culture and into the government sponsorship function. My officials also provided evidence to the committee across 3 sessions. And as accountable officer during this period, the former Chief Executive of WICS had the responsibility for the propriety and regularity of finances. We have learned that, regrettably, this responsibility was not always met. Similarly, the board of WICS failed to meet its responsibility to ensure that appropriate governance arrangements were in place, and this was inexcusable. Yes.
Jamie Green.
Thank you for taking an intervention. And I make my intervention not as Deputy Convener. I'm speaking as a member of the committee in this regard. But given those failures of governance, both in executive senior management and at the board, what does that say about the sponsorship relationship between the Scottish Government and that agency? What does it say that this was allowed to happen year after year after year? Who in the Scottish Government was paying attention to what was happening at WICS, and why did it not happen?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think that Jamie Green makes a fair point, and that's one of the reasons why we also put forward a review into the sponsorship arrangements between Scottish Government and public bodies. And in the WICS situation, we were found to be lacking in terms of the sponsorship arrangement and indeed the feeding back of information from the individual in the Scottish Government responsible for the sponsorship arrangement to government ministers. And one of the things that we saw in the review of that is that it was too reliant on one individual. And that one of the changes that there will be to sponsorship arrangements is that there will be multiple people who will be involved in the sponsorship arrangement. And I think that's a fundamental change going forward. Ministers were not aware of these issues until the Auditor-General's first Section 22 report and the Freedom of Information releases in the months that followed. Upon publication of the first Section 22 report, officials took immediate action alongside the leadership of WICS to drive improvements and hold WICS to account for the delivery of their action plan. As we discovered further examples of completely inappropriate expenditure, it was clear that a more forensic investigation should be undertaken. And one key conclusion from our review is that compliance and cultural issues were long-standing and deep-rooted. As we said at the time, the tone from the top needed to be reset. We acted quickly to do that. In July 2024, we appointed 2 experienced interim board members. Neither of those new board members had any previous connection with WICS. One of those interim members, Ronnie Hines, became interim chair last October, and the recruitment of a permanent chair is underway. And I would like to put on record my personal gratitude to Mr Hines and his fellow board members for the hard work in steering WICS reforms. To the credit of the new board and leadership team, it has made significant progress in redeveloping its structures and governance and changing its culture. A role review has resulted in a restructured senior team. A permanent chief executive is now in post. New directors will join WICS in the autumn. And crucially, financial policies and processes have been fully reviewed, removing the ambiguous and outdated rules of the past. I hope these measures will support an improved culture of compliance. And ministers have also... Yes.
Dr Slamson.
An intervention. Has there been any review of other organisations to see if there's been other breaches of policies and processes like what we've seen at WICS?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said, the sponsorship arrangements between government and public bodies have been completely reviewed, and as part of that, obviously, we're making sure that there is that plural, I suppose, overseeing or relationship in terms of communication of what's happening at board level in all public bodies. Obviously, if you wanted to specifically ask around any specific public bodies, you can certainly write to the Minister concerned and get information on particular public bodies. Obviously, I have got oversight of Wix. Ministers have also reflected on the role of the Scottish Government in relation to the Wix issues. We've formally reviewed the sponsorship relationship and very much agree with the committee's conclusions that this was unfortunately nowhere near as robust as it should have been. The issues with Wix should have been brought to our attention sooner. We recognise that officials should have taken a more proactive approach to potentially novel or contentious expenditure, and similarly, we recognise that the sponsors team should have been more proactive in supporting the Wix board to consider all the options available to them in relation to the departure of the former chief executive. We've acted decisively to make change, including addressing all of the actions identified in the internal sponsorship review. This includes publication of a revised framework document between Scottish ministers and Wix to make the respective roles and responsibilities clearer and ensure there is a systematic approach to engagement rather than over-reliance on any one individual. My officials attend the Wix board meetings regularly as observers, and we have further increased the capacity of the sponsorship team in 2025, and all members of which have completed the required training. I will.
Sarah Boyack.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking intervention? One of the key recommendations, I think, by the committee was that there should be a robust whistleblowing policy for staff to be put in place, because it's one thing having sponsorship team engaging, but actually hearing it from staff and being able to report without fear of losing their jobs is absolutely critical.
Cabinet Secretary, and it would be helpful if you could bring your remarks soon to a close. Thank you.
Yeah, Sarah Boyack makes a very good point. This is one of the issues that was uncovered, that those in the lower level ranks of Wix did fear to speak out, and this is part of the culture that was allowed by the senior management, unchecked by the board, that was allowed to flourish. These measures are fundamental to ensuring the relationship between government and Wix functions properly, and support is accompanied by a critical challenge. And I note that the Auditor General for Scotland intends to monitor Wix closely and look at the sponsorship of public bodies more broadly, and we welcome this scrutiny. In conclusion, I wholly endorse the findings of the committee. I thank them for the important scrutiny and recognise the positive steps that my officials and the new board of Wix and senior management team have taken to address these historical issues. And I want to finish by assuring Parliament that lessons have been learned.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Douglas Lumsden to open on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It gives me no pleasure to be making this speech as my first speech after recess. But I do want to thank the committee, especially for the forensic analysis of what went wrong at Wix, and welcome the convener's contribution today, and also welcome the Cabinet Secretary's words this afternoon of recognising the significant failings of the organisation. This committee report catalogues a litany of errors that at best was pushing the limits of financial rules and at worst was fraudulent activity. From the view of the public, it is clearly a massive waste of taxpayers' money, lining the pockets of quango fat cats who acted without fear of being caught or had some idea that they were untouchable and they were simply taking what they were entitled to. From mulberry wallets to lavish dinners, the culture of entitlement was rife. And it is this spurious waste of taxpayers' money that continues to undermine the confidence of the Scottish people in this devolved government. When these activities came to light and the Chief Executive was forced to resign, it continued to cost the taxpayer money with an ill-thought-out severance package that Audit Scotland said was a decision that was taken too quickly and without considering the wider options. He should have been sacked for gross misconduct, not given a package to leave. In the scathing report from Audit Scotland and the committee report, we can see a culture of misspending. Expenses claims that don't fit with policy and a flagrant disregard for ensured benefit from the public purse. Audit Scotland found that Wix demonstrated poor governance over its finances. There was little to no due process and no concept of ensuring value for money. The way that senior officials used public money was simply unacceptable. They also found that they needed to do more to ensure it was delivering best value for money to the taxpayer. The board seemed to be disengaged with the day-to-day operation of the organisation, and oversight was not happening at any level. People need to understand that board membership for organisations like Wix brings with it serious responsibilities, and that seems to have been overlooked. Spending decisions made without consultation with anyone, and the Chief Executive and senior management did not seek the sign-off for large items of expenditure that should have been discussed. Policies were in place but were ignored by the senior management team. This is a shocking state of affairs for any public body to be in. But the list goes on, Presiding Officer. The committee report has criticised the Scottish Government for not intervening on Wix training policy. The Government were aware of the high cost of training, including, let's not forget, courses at Harvard University that included all flights and accommodation. And I think we heard today it was actually business class travel as well. The committee notes that there have been significant weaknesses and failings in the Scottish Government's sponsorship of Wix that have led to failure to ensure appropriate safeguarding of public funds, more public money wasted. The report goes on to further criticise the Government for appearing to encourage the Chief Executive to negotiate an early exit date. This means that a full disciplinary process that would examine a full account of the failings at Wix from the Chief Executive, and that never happened. And while the financial irregularities are bad enough, there was also significant failings in the culture of the organisations, with high levels of bullying being reported by staff within the organisation. A poor work culture after COVID and failings by management to address issues amongst the staff. All of this, Presiding Officer, speaks to a breakdown in operation of Wix itself and a failure in oversight by the Scottish Government. This has led to massive waste of taxpayers' money and a decline in trust amongst the Scottish people of our public bodies. And this lies solely at the feet of the Scottish Government. And while the committee have received a helpful response from the new Chief Executive, accepting the committee's recommendations and enacting remedial policies to fix the financial irregularities, the assurances from the Scottish Government fall short. The SNP have created a quango culture of organisations delivering services that should be under the purview of the Scottish Government. Of course I will.
Cabinet Secretary.
I invite him to ask me what in my speech is missing, what more he would like to see from me by way of answering any of the questions associated with the report.
Douglas Lumsden.
Well, the first thing I would like to hear is, and actually I apologise to the people of Scotland for all the money it's wasted. You know, this was under the remit of Scottish Government. The Scottish Government have failed in looking after this organisation. I also asked about whether you knew of any other organisations that were being now reviewed. Maybe some of them aren't under your remit, I understand that.
Always through the chair, please.
I would like to know whether the Scottish Government were actually having a full review of all organisations to see if this culture is happening in other places. Because these outside agencies are acting with impunity and must be done by this devolved government to either take control of outcomes or oversee them more robustly. The Cabinet Secretary's letter to the committee talks about establishing a peer-led sponsorship network. Can I suggest to the Cabinet Secretary that we might need a bit more than another talking shop? This narrative around Wix is not the only story of taxpayers' money being wasted by this out-of-time SNP government, whether it's ferries, prisons, spin doctors, equality and diversity champions. We have seen time and time again that hard-earned money of hard-working Scots being squandered. Quite frankly, Presiding Officer, it's a disgrace, and the Scottish public are well and truly sick and tired of seeing their cash disappear under the SNP's watch. Only the Scottish Conservatives are offering common-sense solutions to issues that Scotland is facing. Well, people think it's money being wasted by Mulberry Wallets. It's funny. Well, the people I represent don't find it funny.
The member's concluding. Thank you. This is set against the SNP government never-ending preaching on what they think is best for the Scottish public. The Cabinet Secretary should be hanging her head in shame, coming to the Chamber today and giving her response to this committee report that highlights all too clearly the failings of this government and their cosy network of quangos delivering poor public service to the people of Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Mr Lumsden. I now call Sarah Boyack to open on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to thank the committee members for their work and the clerks to the committee for their support in that work, because this is a damning committee report and there is clear evidence from the Auditor-General for Scotland that Wicks and the Scottish Government had consistently failed to lead by example in ensuring value for money, with significant weaknesses in governance, financial management arrangements and accountability, including spending on overseas training courses costing more than £70,000, Christmas gift vouchers bought without proper approval, and a culture that tolerated excessive hospitality and poor accountability. And that matters to all of us, because Scottish Water is a publicly owned utility that people across Scotland depend on every single day. Clean, affordable water is something we should be able to take for granted. So today's debate is vital that lessons are learnt, that the Scottish Government is held to account for these failures, and that the culture in Wicks has fundamentally changed. But it's also important that other public bodies are made aware of these issues so that these failures are not repeated again. And the areas that the committee investigated and the work of the Auditor-General for Scotland are wide-ranging. Poor governance in their approval of expenditure, weakness in financial control, the role of the Scottish Government's sponsorship team, the role of the board, the departure of the former Chief Executive. And these are issues that are about accountability and value for money, which are from the organisation that is tasked with holding Scottish Water to account. What an irony! Because its job is vital in holding Scottish Water to account. That's what Wicks is there for, to determine the lowest reasonable overcost that Scottish Water will have to incur to meet ministers' environmental, quality and service objectives for the industry. And Wicks's decisions must be consistent with the guidelines set by ministers in their principles of charging. So the repeated failures that the committee has highlighted and that Audit Scotland identified urgently need to be addressed. I thought in a very powerful opening speech, Richard Leonard highlighted the extreme example of governance and financial issues which the Auditor-General noted fell far short of what is expected by a public body. And it's deeply concerning that the committee and the Auditor-General also highlighted Scottish Government failures in holding the Commission to account in decisions that involved expenditure that didn't meet standards of value for money and accountability. Taxpayers' money being spent which didn't meet the Scottish Government's own guidance. And we've had numerous debates in recent months about government wasting taxpayers' money. These huge failures must be addressed urgently, because we should be proud of the fact that we have a publicly owned Scottish Water Company in Scotland, and Wicks is meant to be there to be the economic regulator for the industry and to promote the interests of Scotland's water and sewerage customers. So we should be using our time today to be talking about Scottish Water, because it's key to producing high-quality clean water for our constituents right across Scotland, with affordable bills, but they've gone up by inflation-busting increases of almost 10% this year after 8.8% last year, and with large bonuses for senior staff who already have big salaries. And there are concerns about the wages and the jobs of workers who do the daily work which keeps our infrastructure working, and widening gaps between those staff and those on the top salaries. I was really concerned to hear from Unison members about the fact that they are seeing privatisation by stealth, an increase in private contracts and tenders, and we need to see support for concerned staff who want to be whistleblowers. We need that right across the public sector, and that was really emphasised in the committee's report. We should also be talking about sewage. Research carried out about Surfers Against Sewage highlighted the need for more reliable data and monitoring of sewage outflows, and the need for increased action on extreme weather, which leads to heavy rainfall, water shortages, and as discussed at First Ministers today, we've now got water shortages impacting on our constituents, farming and business communities. So that means Wicks has to work properly, holding Scottish Water to account with value for money the bills we all pay. And that means that Wicks needs to deliver value for money and be accountable. This committee report highlights significant repeated failures both by Wicks and the Scottish Government. So the lessons need to be learned not just by Wicks but right across the public sector. Because how did this happen? The recommendations from the committee report need to be implemented urgently and consistently right across the public sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Boyack. I now call on Mark Ruskell to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I join members in thanking the Public Audit Committee? I'm not a member of the committee. I do sit on the Scottish Commission for Public Audit, but I think it underlines the work the Auditor General Scotland has done, just underlines the importance of Audit Scotland and the AGS. And can I thank the convener for his very powerful comments at the beginning of this debate as well. Reading the committee's report, the word egregious really springs to mind. And at the root of a raft of bad decisions by Wix, there was clearly a lack of focus on its core role as a public body, a cultural problem, a deep cultural problem within the organisation. Wix had been encouraged by the Scottish Government to expand its remit into acting as a private sector consultancy on the international stage. And unfortunately, with that came a total indifference to upholding the standards that are required for a public body. There should have been no confusion at all from the CEO, the Chair and the Board. They all should have known better. The Government's arrangements should have worked to rein in excessive and inappropriate spending from day one, and the Scottish Government should have heard the alarm bells ringing far earlier. The fact that the CEO at the time avoided scrutiny by the Public Audit Committee by resigning is distasteful. The fact that his payoff cost the taxpayer over £100,000 even more so. 70 grand Harvard training courses, funded MBAs, £200 dinners, Christmas gifts. These are all symptoms of an organisation that had lost its sense of responsibility to act in the public interest and deliver value. And this whole affair has undermined trust in the regulator and has been damaging more broadly to the water industry in Scotland. But I'm pleased that lessons have now belatedly been learned. The organisation has been refocused back onto its public role and will move forward with further monitoring from the Auditor General for Scotland. But I think, as Sarah Boyack was just outlining, I think now is the time for a renewed focus on the water industry and its regulators. We are now 20 years on from the Water Services Act, which established Wix. We're also in the early days of a climate crisis that will be driving huge investment decisions for generations to come. And I note the view of the Director General for Net Zero, who told the committee that the Wix provides the impetus to deliver on efficiency savings, reduce bills and assets improvements. But there is no fundamental reason why that impetus cannot come directly from government with no economic regulator in place. Arguably, Wix helped to bring a focus to Scottish Water in those early days, especially in reducing costs and improving performance. But is it still fit for purpose? And why can't that regulatory capacity be built within government? Other states around the world regulate their nationalised utilities by governments setting out formal agreements on performance, pricing and other obligations. They managed to focus on improving governance, robust auditing and citizen engagement without an economic regulator in place. They managed to get the balance right between the necessary technical decisions and the more political choices. And when Wix was established at a time when the Scottish Executive was flirting with privatisation, Ross Finney, the Lib Dem Minister, was keen on turning Scottish Water into a mutual, like Welsh Water, public on the outside, private on the inside, effectively a public shell company with a business being operated by private contractors. Now, I can see the benefit of an economic regulator in that context, but that is not a model that was ever fit for Scotland, and the context of the water industry has changed dramatically around the UK, even in just the last couple of years. With a water bill now inevitable in this next session of the Scottish Parliament and further regulatory reforms coming in England, it is time to consider whether Wix is still fit for purpose. It's a separate issue to the historic bad practice that the Auditor General has reported on, and it should remain so, but there are broader questions about the future of the water industry regulation in Scotland, and we shouldn't be afraid to discuss them.
Thank you, Mr Ruskell. We now move to the open debate, and I would advise those backbenchers seeking to speak in the open debate that it's speeches of up to 4 minutes. With that, I call Colin Beattie, to be followed by Tim Eagle. Mr Beattie.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I'll begin by thanking my colleagues in the Public Audit Committee and the committee clerks whose hard work helped produce this report. This report's more than just about one public body that's gone wrong. It's about trust. Trust that public money is spent fairly and wisely and trust that Parliament can effectively hold public bodies accountable. The findings of this report are worrying. As an immediate example, some £77,000 of taxpayers' money spent on a Harvard Business School training course, which was not subject to proper assessment or control procedures, simply indefensible. This could have been spent on our public services, on teachers' apprenticeships, rather than a costly business course. It may sound like a small sum of money in the grand scheme of the Scottish Government's budget, but it amounts to the yearly wage for 3 entry-level nurses, and I'm sure we all know which of these options would offer better value for public. There's also the incidence of gift vouchers for staff being issued beyond agreed limits, non-compliant spending on recruitment, and very generous hospitality, expensive meals and expensive air travel, staff payoffs that were not properly authorised. These are not simple mistakes. They're not a one-off. These all clearly point to the growth of a culture where responsible monitoring by the board was lacking and where management oversight was weak or incompetent over an unacceptable lengthy period. And this unacceptable lengthy period ran into several years, during which neither internal audit nor external audit challenged either breaches in policy or breaches in processes. And I would encourage revisiting the audit process itself so that lessons may be learned to ensure that in future such a blatantly unacceptable situation does not again arise. Households across the country are feeling the pinch of the cost-of-living crisis. They're cutting back on their outgoings, and they rightly expect public bodies to do the same. Instead, they see news reports of irresponsible spending and lavish entertainment. And this is why the Public Audit Committee so strongly recommended strengthening the Wicks Board, tightening financial and governance policies, and ensuring robust whistleblowing protections. And I welcome the fact that the Scottish Government has listened and responded. But we must not grow complacent. Wicks has revised its policies and brought in new board expertise, but vigilance is essential. I'm pleased that updated policies will require any international consultancy work to receive ministerial approval. And both the Auditor-General and the Scottish Government will continue to monitor Wicks' progress. Oversight can't be something that we do once and then walk away from. It should be built into the culture of how public bodies are run. As I stated in my introduction, this report is not only about Wicks. This report also carries wider lessons. It's a reminder of why transparency matters and why Parliament must hold public bodies to account. It's also a wake-up call to the Scottish Government on deficiencies in its sponsorship model as it affects Wicks. The sponsorship model must be proactive and alert so that potentially questionable practices are challenged at an earlier point. It is vital we remember that every pound of public money matters. We all know of the difficult financial situation that not only our government's in, but our constituents. As they are having to tighten their belts, it's more important than ever to reduce public bodies' waste. The message of this report is clear. Never again should we see this failure in oversight. This report laid bare failings at Wicks, but it's also a worthwhile lesson for other public bodies and the Scottish Government on the need to reform and improve. We must ensure these lessons are learned across the board. Our public bodies must deliver value for the people of Scotland. They deserve public bodies that are transparent, accountable and efficient. And I'm grateful that they have a Parliament that does challenge and hold our public bodies to account. The public deserve every penny of public money to be spent wisely and fairly, and that is the standard we must uphold in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Beattie. I now call Tim Eagle, who is joining us remotely, to be followed by Monica Lennon. Mr Eagle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I apologise for not being able to be present in the chamber for the debate today. I intend to keep my remarks brief, as Douglas Lumsden has perfectly outlined the many failings identified in the Public Audit Committee's very well-written report of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. It is worth noting that this debate comes only a week after SEPA issued an alert, a warning that 6 areas of Scotland are now at significant scarcity, with several areas in the Highlands and Islands region facing moderate scarcity and alerts. Whilst I appreciate prolonged periods of drought is not something this government can control, fears about access to water in some of the most rural parts of Scotland are not helped when my constituents simultaneously hear that the people in charge of Scotland's water have received taxpayer-funded bonuses on top of already good salaries, and that the regulator that is supposed to have oversight of that is failing. I received a response to a written parliamentary question by the Cabinet Secretary Gillian Martin, which has left me somewhat shocked. In the Highlands and Islands, 40.7 megalitres of water was estimated to be lost per day due to leakages in July alone. That is over 40 million litres of water lost every single day. Since the last election, billions upon billions of litres of water have been lost due to leakages in my region alone, let alone across the rest of Scotland. That means that while SEPA are telling the public to cut down their water use, Scottish Water is literally leaking out water. How do you think the public feel when they know that rather than infrastructure being appropriately fixed, large bonuses are instead being awarded? That is why the findings by the Public Audit Committee about Scottish Water's own regulator are particularly damning. The report highlights the extravagance of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, including spending £2,600 on Christmas gift vouchers, hundreds of pounds spent on meals and alcohol, and over £40,000 on items which did not meet the requirements of the Scottish Public Finance Manual. Audit Scotland summed it up perfectly in its 22-23 report when it concluded that value for money should be a key consideration for expenditure incurred by public bodies, and the findings of the auditor highlight unacceptable behaviour by senior officials within the Commission in the use of public funds. They are right. Evidently, this was lost on those in charge, but perhaps more worryingly is the lack of oversight of all of this, and that's been mentioned several times so far. It is evident from this report that far more oversight is needed, but perhaps more broadly, how much other agencies and non-departmental public bodies require scrutiny for how they spend our money. Deputy Presiding Officer, whilst others will disagree with me, I am more and more convinced that Scotland, under this government, has a culture of bloated quangos and a lack of proper oversight, whether it is in the Water Industry Commission for Scotland or the many other bodies that have been set up to take decisions instead of elected members. It is clear more must be done to rein in and keep a check on those organisations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rigo. I now call Monica Lennon to be followed by Elena Whittam. Ms Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I suspect that most of my constituents had never heard of Wix until this scandal erupted. But many more of them are now aware of this important regulator because of what they've heard in the media, but it's for all the wrong reasons. And I think that is really unfortunate because Wix has a really important job to do. In terms of my own reflections, given what we now know, I think it is astonishing that the former CEO was at the helm of this organisation for almost a quarter of a century. I didn't have a lot of interaction with Wix, but as a member of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee, I have been involved in panels where we did question that organisation, and in my experience at the time, I think other colleagues shared this view, I felt there was a hostility to scrutiny and to questions, so perhaps that should have been a red flag. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary, who obviously has inherited a lot of this, letting the Parliament know that lessons have been learned and changes have been made. But I think I share the concerns of others, including Colin Beattie, that this can't be short-term. How can we be confident that this can never happen again and it never happens in any other organisation? So I think colleagues are right. Today we're really looking at the culture of this organisation, but all the infrastructure around that. We've seen massive failings in governance, financial control. Really, it's about greed and entitlement. People who thought they could go to their work and go out for dinner with their colleagues and their cronies and spend hundreds of pounds on booze and fancy meals in luxury hotels and restaurants. And as we talk about this today, I'm reminded that tomorrow is National Food Bank Day. Many of our constituents, including many people who are in work, are relying on food banks to feed themselves and their families. So that's why people are so angry when they hear about these kinds of scandals. And colleagues have talked about the importance of Scottish Water, and Wix is the economic regulator of the water industry. So Sarah Boyack set out why it's really important that we have a properly functioning regulator. Over the summer, but actually for the last few years, there's been, I think industrial relations are at an all-time low in Scottish Water. The workforce And that organisation has lost, I think, confidence in the senior management team at Scottish Water. The regulator doesn't seem to care. I know in my letter to the First Minister, which the Cabinet Secretary replied to over the summer, I think there's a recognition that things have to improve at the Scottish Water. But what I would like to say to the Cabinet Secretary today is that if the regulator wasn't doing its job, and we can't really rely on the judgment of that organisation in recent times, then I think we have to look again at decisions that have been taken within Scottish Water which affect the current workforce, and also, I think, the very real fear that we're seeing backdoor privatisation. The Cabinet Secretary's disagreeing. I'm looking at her face, she's disagreeing, and I'm happy for her to intervene. But if you look at some recent reports on this and you listen to the workers, and I would really urge the Cabinet Secretary to do so, they are very unhappy. They are raising it because they believe it's in the public interest. So we all want world-class water in Scotland. We want safe water, high-quality water. These issues that were rehearsed at FMQs about water scarcity. But we need to have confidence in the regulator, in Scottish Water and in the government, that they won't take their eye off the ball again. So I would leave that with the Cabinet Secretary. I'm happy to hear her response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Lennon. I now call Elena Whittam to be followed by Graham Simpson. Ms Whittam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too thank the committee for their dogged investigation into this matter. Proper spending of public money is of the utmost importance. The principle is not optional. It's not aspirational. It's fundamental to public trust in government and public bodies. And the financial governance we have seen at Wix was, quite frankly, gobsmacking. The findings laid out in the Public Audit Committee's report paint a scandalous picture, one of serious failures in financial management, in board oversight and in a culture at the very top of a public body. And as has already been rehearsed today, all of those lavish spendings that we've heard about, these are not appropriate uses of public funds. They do not reflect public sector values. They fail to deliver value for money, and they absolutely erode public confidence. The failures in governance were just as stark. The report also found out that Wix Board did not exercise the oversight expected of it. Any of us who are or who have been members of boards absolutely have to understand the responsibility that comes when it involves careful management of public resources. Decisions in this case were taken without any due process, without any challenge, and without reference to value. The culture that developed within the organisation, described by staff as toxic, further compounded these governance breakdowns. And my thoughts are with the staff who endured this reported toxic environment, as I know how damaging it can be, especially when there appears to be no clear path into challenging or changing it. Presiding Officer, acknowledging these failures is only part of the response. The Scottish Government must expect the highest standards from its public bodies. In light of the issues raised, action has now been taken. The Government commissioned, published and is now implementing the findings of both internal and independent reviews. Reviews which have led to concrete changes in the way that Wix is governed and how the Scottish Government exercises its sponsorship responsibilities and how whistleblowers are supported. And we've seen some progress. Wix has accepted responsibility and has begun the hard work of reform, tightening financial controls, strengthening internal assurances and refocusing its leadership on transparency and accountability. The Scottish Government, for its part, has taken steps to ensure that its oversight of all public bodies, Wix included, is stronger, clearer and more robust. And it's good to hear today from the Cabinet Minister that reliance on one person's reporting and sponsorship arrangements is no longer going to happen. Presiding Officer, public money must always be treated with respect. These reforms are not just about process, they are about trust. Trust that public bodies are acting in the public interest, trust that decisions are taken with integrity, and trust that where there has been a failure, there is accountability. Going forward, the focus must now be on embedding a culture of compliance within Wix, one that values scrutiny, upholds standards and earns public confidence. And I do echo the calls for a focus on the future of Scottish Water. As a beloved institution, we need to make sure that it's fit for purpose, and also on the operations of other quangos out there. We need certainty that we can have confidence in our public bodies in the way that they use public funds.
Thank you, Ms Whittam. I now call Graham Simpson to be followed by Jackie Dunbar. Mr Simpson.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Let's be clear, this was a major scandal. We had some of the most astonishing meetings that I've ever been involved in. And we've had some robust meetings, but these were some of the most astonishing. This was not just a case of a few minor missteps. This was a catalogue of serious failings. Failings in financial control, in oversight, in leadership and in culture. Failings that have cost the public purse and, more importantly, have cost public trust. The reports from the Auditor General laid bare the reality. Splashing the cash was rife and with no one to turn the taps off. We saw public money spent on overseas training courses, £77,000 to send a staff member who's now left the organisation to Harvard, approved without proper scrutiny, without competitive tendering and without prior government approval. What was the Scottish Government's response to that? Retrospective approval, not because the spending met the standards of the Scottish Public Finance Manual, but because the money had already been spent. If it's brief, Mr Lumsden.
Douglas Lumsden.
Question on that 77,000. Was any of that able to be clawed back from that employee once they'd left the company?
Graeme Simpson.
The answer is no. The money had been spent. This wasn't an oversight. This was rubber stamping. We saw Christmas gift vouchers handed out in breach of delegated limits. We saw expense claims without receipts, alcohol reimbursed and subsistence levels removed. These were not isolated incidents. There were lavish dinners, including one for two, to the posh Champagnet Inn in Linlithgow, which cost £400. Another at the Roadhole restaurant in St Andrews cost £370. We also learned that a London-based KC was on a retainer at huge cost for over a decade. What of the sponsorship team? Their role is to challenge, to scrutinise, to uphold standards, but they failed to do so. They failed to escalate concerns. They failed to intervene. They failed to protect the public interest. That's not good enough. The departure of the former chief executive is another example. A settlement agreement signed in haste, bypassing proper procedures, removing the possibility of disciplinary action, over £105,000 paid out with no clear justification and no accountability. And incredibly, a PR agency was appointed at even more cost to the taxpayer to advise on how to counter negative headlines. You couldn't make it up. Now, Wix has now taken steps to improve financial controls. The Scottish Government has committed to strengthening sponsorship arrangements, not before time. We must also, I think, look at Wix's international consultancy work, put on hold for now. It generated income, but that's what contributed to the drift in culture. And there is that bigger question raised already during this debate of whether we should have this organisation at all. And I think the government needs to seriously look at that and consider getting rid of Wix altogether. Presiding Officer, Parliament has a job to hold public bodies to account. We've got to ensure they operate with integrity, that oversight is robust, that public money is treated with the respect it deserves. Let this report be a turning point and let us work together to restore the standards that the people of Scotland expect and deserve.
Thank you, Mr Simpson. And I call Jackie Dunbar. Ms Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd also like to thank the committee for the hard work that was put into this report. We're here to discuss audits of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, but it would be remiss of me not to also reflect on some other aspects of water in Scotland, given the public coverage there was over recess. If colleagues don't recall, the UK Environment Secretary, Steve Reid, had some very daft comments, in my opinion, about Scottish water, where he claimed wrongly that pollution in rivers in Scotland is worse than in England. I would expect better of a UK minister than to be sharing such misleading claims and talking down Scotland, and talking down the value of Scottish water being in public hands in the process. I'm not going to suggest everything to do with water in Scotland is perfect. Clearly, we have a report in front of us here today that recognises what hasn't gone right, in this case in the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. But I just want to make clear a few things that are undeniable. Scotland has less pollution in our waterways than in England. A recent report found that 66%, two-thirds of Scotland's water bodies, are of good ecological status, compared with just 16.1% in England and 29.9% in Wales, and water bills are lower. Water bills in Scotland averaged just £490 compared to £603 across England. Scottish Water being in Scotland's hands is working, because public ownership means not having to pay out millions in dividends so that it costs folk less for the cleaner water that we have in Scotland. And my final point on this, tap water in Scotland is tastier. I've tried tap water in other places, it's not that great. But get yourself a tap in Scotland, especially in the North East and the Highlands, and pour yourself a glass of cold, crisp Scottish water, and you'll soon find out that it's delicious. Having covered that off and said my piece about Scottish Water, let's go on to the substance of this report. We have, as the report says, highlights a number of failures at the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, and I'm just going to call it Wicks from now on because I just stumbled over it. But there have been a number of financial management and governance failures at Wicks. There were serious governance and financial management failures. There were retrospective authorisation of high-cost training, there was improper staff gifts, there were weak financial controls, and there were cultural issues with bullying and a lack of challenge to leadership. All of that was unacceptable. We expect the highest standards from our public bodies, and that wasn't the case here. That wasn't the case here, and I'm pleased that the Scottish Government has acted decisively and taken action. That included strengthening the Wicks board, resetting the organisation from the top down and appointing interim members to get the organisation on a path to rebuilding public trust. This report is part of that process too. I'm not sure if I've got time, Ms Lennon.
There isn't any time in hand. I don't think members get.
My apologies. That report is part of that process too. I want to thank the committee for taking the time to consider all of this, and for asking the difficult questions that need to be asked where public money is not being spent properly. I want Scottish Water and Wicks and every aspect of water in Scotland to remain something for us to be proud of. Well run, affordable, delicious and publicly owned. And I hope that the work we have seen from the Scottish Government and the committee to help Wicks in its reset will help to ensure that for years to come Scotland's water remains in Scotland's hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Barrett. We will now move to closing speeches, and I call on Alec Rowley to close on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Could I commend the committee on the excellent report and the detail that they've gone into, and Richard Leonard set that out very well, so I don't want to simply repeat that. I believe, as others have raised today, Mark Ruskell, Sarah Boyack, and Graham Simpson and Monica Lennon, I think the government needs to look at what its role is. One of the memories that will always stick with me is when Thatcher was in power and wanted to privatise Scottish Water, and the then Labour MEP, Alec Faulkner, hired buses, and we all bussed it up to Glendevon Reservoir and launched the campaign to stop the privatisation of Scotland's water. And it's important, therefore, yes, what Wicks has been doing, but what have they not been doing? The government needs to have a closer look at this. I spoke this morning with my trade union, Unison, who represent workers there, and I want to put on the record what they said to me. They said, and I quote, "On decisions affecting the workforce, Scottish Water has taken decisions on whether to deliver operations directly or through procurement without any form of consultation with the staff, trade unions, or indeed acknowledgement that this is necessary. There has also been no consultation with the trade unions on Scottish Water's plans for transformation. The First Minister and Cabinet Secretary have both endorsed Scottish Water's publicly owned delivery model, but it is increasingly not a publicly delivered service. Given the failures revealed at Wicks, including the failure in the Scottish Government sponsorship of the regulator, these decisions which have a direct impact on employed staff deserve detailed scrutiny. This is especially timely and necessary as planning is in train for the new regulatory planning cycle 27 to 33. Scottish Government should be asked to investigate the evidence that outsourcing decisions taken by Scottish Water deliver value for money, because it's certainly clear that Wicks haven't been doing their job in doing that. It is time for the Scottish Government to intervene and take the lead in reminding Scottish Water that it is a publicly owned company which the public expect to be properly run. The First Minister and Cabinet Secretary continue to express confidence in Scottish Water's executive leadership team. They should be reminded that their confidence is not shared by the Scottish Water's workforce. In the last staff survey, there was a very low level of confidence in the direction the executive leadership team are taking the company forward. So I would say we should be proud. I actually agree with the point you make. I was appalled when I heard the Labour Minister attacking Scottish Water. But we need, if it's a public company, which it is, we fought for that, we stopped the privatisation. We need the Government of Scotland to show the leadership, and to show the leadership because there are serious concerns, I believe, about the leadership that exists within Scottish Water at this present time. It is a public company, it is under public ownership, and therefore the Government must take more of a lead, and I would ask them to do that. Finally, I agree with Mark Ruskell when he questions whether this is the right model, whether Wicks is actually the right model going forward. And I think, perhaps not in this Parliament, but in the next Parliament, these are serious questions that the next Government must look at. Scottish Water, we're proud, we stopped it from being privatisation. Let's ensure that it's not privatised by the back door, by management that are accountable, it seems, to nobody.
Thank you, Mr Rowley. I call on Jamie Hilker-Johnston. Up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My thanks go to the Public Audit Committee and their clerks, of course, for their report published back in May, and, of course, to the Auditor General for his earlier work in looking at the functioning of the Commission. Sadly, we are dealing with a report which, as we've heard, details what the committee have called a catalogue of failures in a Scottish Government quango. Where public bodies fall short, we should all have an active interest in putting things right, particularly in cases where public money is misused. This chamber has a responsibility to taxpayers, ensuring that their contributions are put to good use. So I welcome the committee's report, and particularly its recommendations, where they build on and develop the work of Audit Scotland. It's an important step in setting things right after this very public scandal. We should consider, however, that the issues at the Water Industry Commission happened in plain sight. This was not an organisation gone rogue. It was not some obscure institution hidden away or forgotten about. We have heard of regular communication with the Scottish Government at a variety of levels. There was no shortage of red flags. Instead, this seems to be a story of two organisations, the Scottish Government and the Commission, operating at cross purposes, and of the role of oversight being consistently neglected. Other members have detailed many of the individual issues with the Commission, and I do not intend to rehash them. However, this was more than just bureaucracy being circumvented or a lack of diligence in reporting. Many of these situations are essentially inexplicable. What should be surprising is the number of opportunities that existed to have the Commission change course. We find several examples where proper procedures were not followed, but approval for actions taken by the staff was given retrospectively. While there are occasions when this sort of retrospective permission will be necessary, I would suggest they should be few and far between. In repeatedly authorising actions, the Scottish Government effectively opened the gates for the Commission to act how it pleased. I'm encouraged at least that the committee's report notes that this has been recognised and a different approach will be taken toward retroactive approvals by the Scottish Government. Overall, the report recognises significant failings and weaknesses in the Scottish Government's sponsorship role. There are likely issues that go beyond The Commission, as the report notes, the Auditor-General's evidence that there is, and I quote, a wide variation in the quality of sponsorship of public bodies. There has been public concern at the use of quangos and whether true accountability is provided by having these organisations at arm's length from government. Regardless of what view you take on that debate, where autonomy is needed, it must be accompanied by high standards of governance, communication and conduct, something that has been sorely lacking. And while progress has been made, it's clear that there are still many issues to address. If I can briefly turn to some of my colleagues' contributions, my colleague Douglas Lumsden's speech focused on the importance of the oversight role and the clear evidence in the report that certain staff were behaving in a way that suggests they saw few consequences for their actions. He also dealt with the departure of the previous chief executive, which of course has a considerable cost, and the positive response from the new chief executive, who will most likely face additional scrutiny as he attempts to turn things around at the Commission. All in all, Douglas Lumsden pointed to this is far from an isolated example of taxpayers' money being lost in Scotland's public sector. In many ways, this seems to be a government that is a little too comfortable with seeing people's money wasted and siphoned off. Tim Eagles spoke about the context of the water industry here in Scotland and the importance of proper regulation. The provision of water is, as he highlights, of fundamental importance in the regions like ours in the Highlands and Islands. He also touched upon a quango culture in Scotland, a sense of abundance of public bodies of various types operating without the proper care and oversight of government. While today's debate is only one example, our concerns with the governance of public bodies, on this side of the chamber anyway, extend more widely. And if I can turn very briefly as well to the convener's contribution, he rightly said this was a matter of serious concern for this Parliament and for the government. Both of this incident had happened, but they should be allowed to happen as well. And he highlighted, of course, the case of a civil servant who said there was no material benefit in retrospectively challenging the £77,000 staff spend of staff training at Harvard University. And that, I'm sure, would worry people in this chamber. It would certainly anger so many members of the public as well. Presiding Officer, it is notable the Commission is at least partially a regulatory body. That business and other organisations are expected to look to the Commission for regulation when it has taken such a slapdash approach to its own rules and standards as a problem. And as the convener rightly highlighted, there will clearly be an ongoing issue of trust. That trust will have to be carefully rebuilt by the Commission, but by this Scottish Government as well.
Thank you, Mr Halker-Johnston. I call on the Cabinet Secretary. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome all the contributions from the Chamber today, and of course they have gone with Wicks and the committee report, but I've been listening very carefully to all the things that have been put to me. I mean, I have heard valid criticism of Wicks and the Scottish Government. I have to say I've also heard not very valid criticism as well. You know, I asked certain members who said that there were still gaps in what the Scottish Government's response, and indeed, you know, I think if they are legitimate, I'll look into them, but I don't really think they are. I think that we have acted swiftly to address the concerns. I had great concerns myself about the sponsorship issue. I wanted to make sure that it was fit for purpose going forward. And I don't ever want to be in a position as a Cabinet Secretary finding out the things that I found out about Wicks when I took up the post. I was as shocked as anyone else. And to be quite honest, I'm very angry. I'm very angry that public servants, no longer working for Wicks, now long gone, allowed this culture to happen. And the reasons behind it, some have pointed to some of the reasons why that might have happened. But I will be keeping a very close eye on the new leadership. And indeed, there will be a new chair appointed. They're recruiting right now. The various reports, recommendations and actions were taken. I have really tried with my director to do all we can to avoid the repeat of any of these issues at Wicks. And then certainly I want to again thank Ronnie Hines for taking up the post temporarily to oversee those reforms. I do think now that the time is to... No, I've only got 6 minutes. I do think now the time is to look forward. And I will take the comments of Monica Lennon, Alec Rowley and indeed Mark Ruskell into account as I work with this new team Because I think that there's legitimate questions been posed. Alec Rowley pointed to the fact, what were they not doing? What were the old guard not doing? What were they maybe not scrutinising? And I think that it's important that when we recruit a new chair and I speak with the new chief executive, that we're asking these very pointed questions. And I want to say also how refreshing it is to hear a Labour member, Alec Rowley, call out the misinformation that Steve Reid has put about Scottish Water, because the nationalisation of Scottish Water should be a source of pride for all of us. We rightly have to scrutinise how that is done, but our water is of a very high quality, and it is unfortunate that even today, in DEFRA questions, he repeated the same misinformation. As a government, we have learned lessons on sponsorship, and I want to talk about sponsorship particularly. Our approach is now robust and systematic, with appropriate senior scrutiny supported by a team who are properly resourced and trained. They will continue to monitor progress and ensure that long-term change is embedded. And the reset of Wix continues. 3 new board members, formally appointed last month, taking the board to a full complement. Graham Simpson pointed out that their global consultancy work is paused. Was this a driver of the culture? I think that's a very legitimate question. I would have to be convinced that this activity has a positive effect on the performance of the regulator and Wix as a whole before it were to restart. Good governance will enable Wix to focus on its core functions. I want to see them working on their core functions. I want to have the new board and the new management prove to me that they are a reformed organisation. Because Wix has been a highly respected regulator. That's why they had the global consultancy, because they were asked for their consultancy and opinion throughout the world. Their role has informed some of the conclusions in the Independent Water Commission's recent review of the sector in England and Wales. I want to see them being a respected organisation again. And I would say we had a comment about whether they were just not small mistakes. These weren't mistakes. These weren't mistakes that buying expensive meals, allowing ridiculous expenses. They weren't mistakes. It was part of a culture that had to change. These were not errors. These were willful decisions that were taken. I will do.
Graham Simpson.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for taking the intervention. She may be coming on to it, but several members have raised the question of whether we actually need the Water Industry Commission, at least in its current form. Does she agree that that is a valid question to address?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can understand why it's been asked, given what has happened. But for the want of a few individuals that at the top who have perpetrated a culture which is just not acceptable in a public body, I think we need to give Wix a chance to re-establish itself, because they have and are widely respected in terms of the core role that they perform. I want to give them a chance to re-establish themselves. But, obviously I'll listen to what people have said today. I'm afraid I don't have time. I've got 20 seconds left, so I will actually close. I hope this debate and the committee's report will draw a line under the historical issues raised, and that members will join me in looking forward, but with enhanced scrutiny of Wix. The task I now put to Wix is to rebuild public trust by governing itself appropriately while delivering effective regulation for the people of Scotland. And I personally will take a direct interest in ensuring that happens.
Thank you. Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Jamie Green to wind up on behalf of the Public Audit Committee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank all members for their contributions? Let me just quote 3 words from today's debate for those who are just joining us. Gobsmacking, scandalous, egregious. Those are some of the comments that have been made about the outcomes of our public audit report. I'd like to thank Audit Scotland particularly for their detailed and forensic analysis of this public body. And had they not sanctioned a Section 22 report, perhaps none of this would have come to light. Let me be clear, the Public Audit Committee of this Parliament was absolutely united across political party lines in its criticisms of what occurred at the Water Industry Commission. Our committee was united in calling out the failures of government, both within that regulator itself, its board, its leadership and management team, the sponsorship team at the Scottish Government, who, I may add, report directly into ministers. And our committee was absolutely united in the numerous examples of careless financial controls, none of which presented value for public money or the sort of fiscal prudence that we've come to expect from well-paid executives in positions of trust. Now, much of our deliberations focused on the arrangements concerning the departure of the former Chief Executive. We've heard some of that today. Here's what happened. The day before the Auditor-General for Scotland published his first report into Wix, the former Chief Exec took the decision to resign. The board fast-tracked that resignation in a matter of days. He was then paid for his 6-month notice period. There are so many questions, Presiding Officer, unanswered about that entire process. And let me tell you why. Because his exit hampered our ability to scrutinise and to hear a fulsome report of what happened, not just about his departure, but the events which led to his departure. Because that's really what mattered. What was the cause of his departure? What happened in that body that led to the Section 22 report? Now, I am extremely concerned, as was the committee, to learn that the Chief Executive was potentially advised to resign ahead of a Public Audit Committee inquiry. In fact, he said, and I will quote from him directly, and it's in our report, the Deputy Director of Water Policy at the Scottish Government reiterated the likelihood of an inquiry and that I should perhaps negotiate an earlier exit. What on earth happened in that conversation? Which senior civil servant should ever offer advice to like that to a Chief Executive of a public board? I haven't got time, I'm sorry. Let me be clear. The PAC Committee expects accountable officers in these organisations to remain in post insofar as is possible to be accountable for their actions and the actions of the body that they oversee. This whole ordeal speaks to a wider issue, and that is the relationship between senior civil servants and the chief executives and board chairs of these public organisations. Our committee report makes that clear, and I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary acknowledged that both in the report and in the response to it by saying, and I quote the Cabinet Secretary, "We recognise that there were shortcomings in the way the Scottish Government carried out its sponsorship role." That is a welcome admission, but I think it goes further than that. In our evidence sessions, we witnessed direct contradictions in evidence from witnesses. During one evidence session, I remember in September of last year, the former chair of Wix was asked whether the board did follow due process. He said they did. A senior civil servant from the Scottish Government, sitting 2 feet away from him, said that they didn't. And so the back and forth went during the committee session. He said, she said. Now, that does not strike me, or did it strike the committee, as an effective or productive or even healthy relationship between a public body and the Scottish Government. Now, the Auditor-General also found that the culture at Wix not just did not focus on best value for public money, but it highlighted issues regarding behaviour and culture, and that should also be of concern to us all. Senior officials, and this is in the Government's own review, were aware of issues relating to behaviour and culture. There was a lack of evidence to demonstrate that any action had been taken as a result. Now, I hope that something has been learned from that whole process. It cannot be a case that whistleblowers are dealt with in the manner that they were. We had evidence sent to us by former members of staff of Wix who talked about a toxic culture in the organisation. Now, the other issue which has risen today, which I think looks forward about what happens next, and that is that inherent conflict of interest which arose at Wix. Because Wix was acting, of course, as an industry regulator, an economic regulator, not an environmental one, I should add, a task which no doubt has some merit and is necessary, but it was also operating as a quasi-commercial organisation which directly arose off the back of the Scottish Government's hydronation strategy. Indeed, the very role of Wix moving forward is a very live debate, and I think it's one that we should have before the election. Now, the chair of the board of Wix himself said it is not unreasonable to ask questions about whether an organisation such as Wix is needed. Does Scotland need an organisation to regulate the water industry when Scotland has no commercially competitive residential water industry? Now, that is a valid question. Wix's own website if you look at it right now, focuses entirely on their international consultancy remit and less on the regulatory role which we expect it to play. Their own website says, I quote, that they really enjoy meeting others who work in the field of regulation, as some sort of rationale as to how Scottish customers benefit from this international commercial activity. That will come as no comfort to those who are seeing their water bills rise or their rivers polluted. Public bodies which behave like private companies in terms of their remuneration packages, the perks, their expenses, their culture and their management style will inherently and undoubtedly result in the very failures that we've heard about today and which our report highlights. I welcome that that activity has been put on pause, but we would recommend that a full business case is carried out before any decision is made about whether that should resume. I'll close, Presiding Officer, by saying that this report is one of the most damning I have ever had the pleasure of drafting in my 9 years here. Our forensic work and that of Audit Scotland shone a light on practice which hitherto had gone unnoticed. It should not have taken a Section 22 report to unearth this sort of fiscal mismanagement in a public body. The report does two things. It highlights the importance of good audit, but it also highlights the importance of this Parliament's Public Audit Committee. I am really proud and pleased to be its Deputy Convener, because we take a convivial and a constructive attitude to the scrutiny we do. We park our politics at the door, we roll up our sleeves and we get on with it, and this 48-page report is testament to that. My only hope is that the Government, Wix and all other public bodies take heed of today's debate. We are watching you, we say to them. We want our findings, our criticisms, to result in tangible and concrete action and change to ensure that these errors never, ever happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. That concludes the Public Audit Committee debate on the 2022-23 and 2023-24 audits of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of motion on legislative consent 18704 in the name of Tom Arthur on Employment Rights Bill, UK legislation, and I call on the Minister to speak to and move the motion.
Moved.
Thank you, Minister. The question on this motion will be put at decision time. There are two questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first is that motion 18680 in the name of Richard Leonard on behalf of the Public Audit Committee on the 2022-23 and 2023-24 audits of the Water Industry Commission for Scotland be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. And the final question is that motion 18704 in the name of Tom Arthur on Employment Rights Bill UK legislation be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we will move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access the digital voting system.